All right. Well, did RFK Jr. ignore one of his top advisors during the pandemic? Dr. Jay Couey helped RFK Jr. write his book about the pandemic, and he says that he told RFK Jr. that his work showed that the pandemic could not have happened naturally, and he was shrugged off and ignored. Now, given that RFK Jr.'s promises as the head of Health and Human Services is that he will explore all avenues when it comes to scientific analysis, is this story something that will give us pause that perhaps there are things that RFK Jr. is prone to ignore? Well, Dan Cohen from Uncaptured Media has been in touch with Dr. Couey, and he brings us this story. Dan, thank you so much. Can you give us the background of how you came across Dr. Couey's Couey, and what his claims are?
Well, I started to suspect that the idea of a pandemic was questionable by my research on, in particular, the lab leak story. And what I saw is that not only the lab leak, but the natural origin story, both sides of this were basically being promoted by deep state mouthpieces, whether it was USAID and NED funded outlets on one side, and then at the same time having like fact checkers say that the other side was false. The intelligence agencies saying that we think maybe it came from a lab, or we didn't think it come from a lab, or Tom Cotton or whoever it was, President Trump in his first term saying it came from a lab. And then the fact checkers would say, no, it definitely did not come from a lab, but not definitely, we don't know. And this has gone on for years and years. And so I started to look at the way, and we've discussed this on Redacted before, the way death certificates, for example, were flipped on their head. They created a new way of writing death certificates specifically for COVID-19 in order to inflate the death count. The same thing with PCR testing, which is everyone just accepted that you stick this thing up your nose and it magically tells you if there's a virus, a specific virus there. There's a huge amount of fraud that went along with that. And so I started to suspect that maybe this thing is not what they're saying. I ended up being, I got in touch with Jonathan J. Couey, who was a professor, an academic biologist at the University of Pittsburgh. He was fired for correctly saying that the COVID jabs are something called transfections. And that's a term that is not used in media much, but that's what it was from the start. It wasn't a new technology. It was something that actually existed. But my question was, is this thing even biologically possible? Because everything I'm seeing suggests it's not. And Jonathan J. Couey, his position was that this was actually biologically impossible, so that basically an RNA virus, this is his position, cannot create a pandemic. And Jonathan Couey, Jay Couey, he ended up, he was hired by RFK Jr. to write the book, to help write and research the book, The Wuhan Cover-Up, which was RFK's big book on supposedly how the lab leak happened. And in the middle of writing this book, Jay Couey, who really was very confident that the SARS-CoV-2 did come from the lab in Wuhan, he had basically gone back to the start, and he realized that this is all biologically impossible, that it's nonsense. And he went to, well, actually, we have a clip of him explaining what happened here. Maybe we can run that.
This book would not have been possible without the expertise and invaluable insights provided by Jonathan J. Couey and then a bunch of other people. First name that he mentioned. Not only that, but I'm in the index and I'm quoted in that book 6 times. The last quote in that book is that they wouldn't even need a virus to do this. Now, the thing that he won't tell you and won't talk to me about anymore, and Children's Health Defense, I believe, actually fired me for, is that I think that these people are covering this up. I taught them, before this book was published, I taught all of the people that worked on this book the biology that I'm going to teach you now in much more detail, with much more questions and many more arguments. And I won them all. And you're not going to find any evidence of that in this book, because as Bobby told me to my face, this is not the book for those answers. And I'm sorry, but if we're going to save America, we need those answers right now.
So, Dan, I'm just why? You know, just a simple question, why?
Well, that's the $1 million question, Clayton. I mean, he is credited, as he said there, as the first person in the acknowledgments without whom the book would not have been possible. And he says at the end of the book that you don't actually even need a virus to do what was done. So the fact that he ignored his own top advisor and told him this is not the book for that is a big scandal, in my opinion. And now RFK has ascended to very powerful position. He's the head of HHS, and it seems like he's playing, well, to put it nicely, he's playing politics. So, I mean, this is a question that I think RFK needs to be asked directly. Why did you ignore your own top advisor, whom you credited in your book as, you know, this book would have been impossible without him? And I think more people need to reach out to Jonathan J. Cooey and ask him what he thinks, and ask him to explain, well, why do you think this? I'm not a biologist or virologist. I can't personally, I can't assess those claims. I don't have the scientific background, but he definitely should be heard out.
Right. And so the thing about, you know, I had a lot of hope in RFK Jr. as in this powerful position. I have not seen fluoride mandate that he promised on the day one of the Trump administration. And now he put out this week something that said that anti-Semitism is one of the great threats to our national health. And obviously,
what?
Where's the science that shows that? Do you think? I mean, I don't want to see him play politics, and now we have evidence that that's happening. So, what's your take on that?
Well, you know, in 2023, when I first started to see RFK had a very pro-Israel position, in contrast to all of his talk about the tyranny during the COVID era and lockdowns and mandates, that suggested to me, if he does not see what's happening, you know, in the Gaza Strip or the West Bank as tyranny, where in the Gaza Strip, people are surrounded by remote control machine guns, that is the picture of tyranny, then there's something that is not right or not honest. And if you remember in January 2023, the piece that we did here on Redacted, we did a big piece on, in fact, a series on Peter Hotez. And Peter Hotez partnered with the Israel lobby outfit, the Anti-Defamation League, claiming that RFK was spreading dangerous misinformation. And he took credit publicly and got RFK kicked off of Meta, so Facebook and Instagram. He got him suspended by those platforms. And then he partnered with the ADL and said, this is, they said, anti-vax is a new form of anti-Semitism, which is obviously just total nonsense. If you're critical or you question like pharmaceutical products, then you hate Jews. That's completely insane and frankly insulting, honestly. They're just exploiting anti-Semitism. So now it comes full circle, because RFK is basically tacitly partnered with Peter Hotez, who got him censored by creating some interagency task force and claiming that anti-Semitism, which he just means criticism of Israel, is some kind of public health crisis in our universities and college campuses. And so this is another clear indicator or clear evidence that RFK is playing politics. It's not about public health. It's not about saving our children or actually stopping anti-Semitism or anything like that. And so I've been very skeptical and critical of him basically since I first saw that suggested to me or demonstrated to me that he's not the principled figure that he portrayed himself as.
Yeah. And what are we missing when he says this? Because I don't see data of a mental health crisis for... When
I kiss my kids at bed at night, I'd be more worried about them like not washing their hands and getting sick from catching a cold or something like that. I don't kiss my kids at bed at night and say, don't catch anti-Semitism tonight when you go to sleep. How is the Health and Human Services? Like, what kind of madness are we sitting in right now?
Well, I mean, the question is there proof of this? And
is it a virus?
Yeah, is there proof that we don't see, right? Because I don't see this. And are they making up proof?
Well, I mean, if they're using the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which is not anti-Semitism, but is criticism of Israel, well, yes, people are very critical of Israel because of the genocide that they've carried out over, the last year and a half. So if that's the metric, then sure. But that's not anti-Semitism per se. That is just criticism of a foreign country that all of our American tax dollars are funding. So it's totally disingenuous. And in fact, I mean, it actually creates anti-Semitism is what I think it really does. It generates anti-Semitism, which serves Israel, because then they can say, oh, look at all these terrible students who love Hamas and want to kill Jews.
Right. But I'm reading their work here, and they say, we just don't like that this is happening on college campuses. People are protesting the Israeli government. But they're not saying this has caused a surge in mental health for Jewish people, mental health problems. They're not saying that Jewish people are actually being physically harmed. Is there somewhere that I just don't see it because I'm in different corners of the internet? You have to have proof of a harm in order to say that this is a health and human service issue. And so I don't know, if somebody sees something like that, they can send it to Dan and I.
I mean, it may be that there's increased anti-Semitism because you have a state committing genocide that calls itself the Jewish state, and not that it's just a state where Jewish people live, but Benjamin Netanyahu has said that I'm the prime minister of all the Jews around the world. So now any Jew who happens to be your neighbor living in the United States is suddenly associated with what's going on in the Gaza Strip or the West Bank. So it does make sense that there would be an increase in anti-Semitism. But I mean, is there a metric? And if that's the case, that's not what RFK is opposing. He's opposing criticism of Israel. And I mean, the other point I think we should make is there are real public health crises. We have a gigantic opioid crisis. How come nobody, RFK is not talking about that? He's just talking about some supposed anti-Semitism crisis. To me, it's just totally shameful.
Yeah, it's a low-hanging fruit, and their paid benefactors right now are just like, that's what they wanted. Right, the first agenda item on their thing, go after anti-Semitism.
Right.
We put all the money we funneled into your campaigns. Make sure that that's the first thing you do.
Look, we'll look for it if we see data that's showing that people are actually being harmed by their health. But again, show me the evidence. Dan, thank you so much for your time today on both stories. We really appreciate it. Make sure you follow Dan's work on X and also his media company, Uncaptured Media, as well on YouTube.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks a lot.